Would you become a killer or try risking escape? The tires screeched as the taxi slid to a halt at the curb. I grabbed my suitcase and got into the back seat, telling the driver my address. He was middle-aged, with a scruffy beard and intense eyes peering at me in the rearview mirror. Something about him gave me the creeps, but I tried to shake it off. As we drove, an uneasy silence filled the cab. I cleared my throat. "So, how long have you been driving cabs?" I asked, trying to make small talk. The driver smiled. "Long enough to know this city like the back of my hand, and to meet all kinds of interesting people." His tone seemed to hint at some darker meaning. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. We soon arrived at an abandoned warehouse. "Wait, this isn't my address," I said, alarmed. "Just need to make a quick stop," he replied calmly as he stopped the car. My heart pounded. I tried to open the door but realized the child locks were on. I was trapped. The driver flashed an unnerving grin. "Why don't you join me inside?" he asked with a chilling pleasantness. I hesitated, then reluctantly stepped out, seeing no other option. As soon as we were inside the warehouse, the driver suddenly tackled me from behind. I struggled with all my might as he dragged me down concrete steps to a dark basement, my screams echoing but receiving no answer. I found myself thrown into a small room illuminated only by a dangling light bulb. The door slammed shut behind me, leaving me sealed in with no way out. Hours stretched by in terror as I pounded desperately on the door. But finally, starving and exhausted, I sank to the cold floor and fell into a fitful sleep. Over the next few days, a hellish routine began. The driver would come twice a day to bring meagre portions of food and water. Sometimes he would stay to leer at me silently with those intense, terrifying eyes. Other times he would force me to look at photos of his previous victims, recounting every horrific detail. Each day my dread grew at what he had planned for me. One day, he tossed a small cardboard box at me. Confused, I opened it to find a driver's cap and coat, just like his. "Time for your orientation ride," he said with an eager glint in his eye. I recoiled, refusing to become part of his twisted schemes. Furious, he stormed out, returning to punish me with brutal beatings. Too weak to resist any longer, I finally submitted and put on the uniform. I was ushered out into the taxi with the driver. As we prowled the streets, a young woman flagged us down. My heart pounded with panic as she got in. I thought desperately of escape plans, but knew I was too feeble to overpower him. As we neared the warehouse, she glanced up from her phone, alarmed by the unfamiliar route. I was out of time. I had to act now. Veering the wheel sharply, I crashed the taxi as the woman screamed. Dazed, the driver fumbled for his weapon, but I was faster. With shaking hands, I grabbed a shard of broken glass and slit his throat. I sat there, soaked in blood, almost disbelief that my ordeal could be over. The woman and I, both battered but alive, tightly embraced with tearful relief. As the police sorted out the grisly details, I overheard that 6 more bodies had been found on the warehouse premises, confirmed to be the work of the deceased taxi driver. News reports praised me as a hero for the role I played in ending his murderous rampage and saving his would-be next victim. But despite the validation I received, I still felt stained somehow. When I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment, I thought I saw a terrifying glint of darkness in my own eyes that reminded me of his. I knew that I had it in me to go down that path too. The urge lingered, tempting me like the pull of an addiction. Insomnia plagued me as visions of what could have been continued to torment my restless mind. I imagined all too vividly the feel of the knife plunging again and again into tender flesh. I pictured the euphoric power I might experience watching helpless victims struggle in vain, hearing the delightful gurgle as they took their final breaths. I lusted for control over that exhilarating edge between life and death. During the daytime I maintained appearances, working a mundane office job as I integrated back into normal society. No one guessed the secret cravings that raged beneath my polite smiles, but the temptation only intensified, feeling that ordinary life could never fulfill me. One weekend, while running errands, I spotted a young female college student waiting alone at the bus stop as dusk approached. I idled my car conspicuously, my breath quickening as I debated my next move. She met my stare with unease, clutching her pepper spray tightly. Just then, the bus arrived and she hurried on board, unharmed but visibly shaken. I drove off, pounding the steering wheel in frustration, enraged at being denied what I desired most. From then on, I knew I was in too deep to ever turn back. I outfitted the basement into my own personalized dungeon, soundproofing the walls. Then I quit my job, bought an old taxi, and painted it to match his. Now, fully embracing my true calling, I spent nights circulating, impersonating a driver, as I hunted for victims to satisfy my savage cravings. Soon, the fearful rumors began spreading through town again about women disappearing after getting into a certain cab. But I was careful, disposing of the bodies far from my property. Without evidence or suspects, the baffled local police struggled to make any headway on the investigation. Meanwhile, locked away securely under my complete control, my latest captive awaited her fate. I had specially selected this one for her resemblance to that first woman I rescued, whose terrified expression once ignited my desires. Now finally living out those dark dreams, I could take my time, drawing out the fear and pain excruciatingly slowly. Approaching the chamber, I was intoxicated by anticipation for the night's devilish delights. She recoiled as I entered, dreading the torment to come. My own eager eyes glinted as I smiled. "Didn't anyone warn you never to get in a taxi alone at night?" "Don't worry. We have all the time in the world for me to teach you that lesson."